There is a moment, quiet yet revolutionary, when a person stops explaining their pain to the one who caused it. It does not come in thunder or fire. It often arrives in silence, after the soul has grown weary from trying to be understood by someone who has no intention of listening. That moment is not born from pride but from clarity. It is the precise turning point when the need for validation dissolves, and the deeper truth, the one that has always lived within, begins to speak, louder than words ever could. We spend much of our early emotional life pleading to be seen, to be heard. We explain ourselves again and again, sometimes to a parent who could not love us in the way we needed, sometimes to a partner who could only love us under conditions that shrunk our spirit. We explain because we are human, and to be human is to long for connection. But what happens when the connection we seek cannot be made because the other person has sealed themselves off? What happens when your pain is met not with compassion, but with denial, minimization, or even mockery? Something dies in us the first time we are not believed. Not physically, but energetically. We feel invisible, as though our internal world has no weight or meaning. And in response, we often work even harder to be understood. We raise our voice. We write long messages. We try to offer context, hoping that if we just explain the story well enough, they will finally get it. But that rarely happens, because someone who cannot sit with their own discomfort will never be able to sit with yours. And here lies the deeper tragedy. In trying to be seen by the person who hurt us, we begin to lose sight of ourselves. Yet the moment we stop trying to convince them, that is the moment we begin to return home. When you live in your truth, you don't need anyone else to validate it. You simply live it. Your presence carries it. You no longer plead with others to admit what they did. You no longer hope for the perfect apology that might mend the rupture. Instead, you begin to hold your pain with reverence, not as a weapon, but as a teacher, and in doing so, you make it sacred. Think of the oak tree that grows on the cliffside. It doesn't demand that the wind respect it. It simply grows, rooted deeply in what it knows is true. The wind may batter it, but still it stands. Not because it shouted, but because it remembered what it is. This is what it means to live your truth. To stop handing your worth to those who mishandled your heart. To stop waiting for them to see the light they refuse to acknowledge. To become the light for yourself. I once spoke with a man who had spent years trying to repair a relationship with his brother. His brother had mocked him publicly, spread lies, humiliated him in front of family. And yet, for years, the man kept reaching out, trying to clear the air, hoping that if he just explained how much it hurt, things would change. But they never did. One day, after a therapy session, the man stopped calling, not with anger, but with acceptance. He said, "I finally realized I was giving him power every time I tried to get him to see me. He doesn't want to see me, but I do." And with that, he began a life where his energy went toward people and spaces that honored his truth. 2 years later, his brother reached out, no longer with bravado, but with regret. Because the absence of seeking became the loudest truth of all. When you stop explaining your pain, you reclaim the dignity of your own experience. You stop trying to squeeze your truth into someone else's comprehension. Some people will never understand what they did to you because to understand it would require them to change. And change is terrifying for those who build their identity on control, superiority, or denial. So they dismiss your pain not because it is false, but because it threatens the image they cling to. Let them. Let them have their illusion, and you have your freedom. We are conditioned to believe that silence equals weakness, that not confronting someone means we are letting them win. But real power is not in confrontation, it is in embodiment. When you live aligned with your truth, you don't need to fight for recognition. You radiate something far more powerful than confrontation: integrity. And that integrity speaks volumes. There is a certain kind of quiet that comes over a person who has stopped explaining. Not the quiet of repression, but of resolution. You begin to feel it in your posture, your voice, your gaze. You stop chasing closure because you've become your own closure. And that energy, stable, rooted, unshakable, becomes its own kind of reckoning for those who once dismissed you. They may not say it, but they feel it. The absence of your explanation forces them to sit with what you used to carry for them. And that is when remorse, if it ever comes, is born. But even if it doesn't, something more important has happened. You have freed yourself. You are no longer bound to their understanding. You are no longer entrapped in their narrative. You are no longer the injured one pleading for justice. You are simply a soul who has seen the truth and chosen to live by it regardless of who believes you. The journey from explanation to embodiment is not easy. It can feel lonely at first, but over time it becomes the very thing that draws the right people to you. The ones who see you without being asked, who hear you without needing a monologue, who hold space for you without defensiveness. And suddenly, the world begins to feel different, not because it has changed, but because you have. You are no longer explaining your pain. You are living your truth. And in that sacred shift you become untouchable, not because you have no wounds, but because you have made them holy. There comes a time when one grows tired, not just physically, but existentially, of the endless performance, the exhausting dance of proving, pleasing, appearing. At first it seems harmless, even noble. We strive to be good. We try to be liked. We push ourselves to fit the expectations carved by family, culture, or even our younger selves. But somewhere along the way, something begins to fracture. We sense a dissonance between the face we wear and the soul beneath it. And the more we ignore that tension, the louder it becomes. To prioritize peace over performance is not laziness. It is not a sign of apathy or resignation. It is the beginning of an awakening. It is the soul whispering, "No more masks." When we value peace, we are not withdrawing from the world. We are re-entering it, but this time from a place of truth rather than survival. Imagine a woman named Elisa. From childhood, she was praised for being the good girl. She got straight A's, smiled through discomfort, and anticipated everyone's needs before her own. By 35, she had the career, the husband, the house, and yet every night, she lay awake with a gnawing ache in her chest. Not sadness, not depression, but a haunting sense that she was living a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt empty on the inside. One day, during a quiet walk in nature, she realized she was exhausted from performing. Not acting, in a play, but acting in life. Her every decision was based on how it would be received, not how it resonated. That day, she made a quiet vow to choose peace, even if it cost her praise. This shift is subtle yet seismic. When we choose peace, we no longer rush to explain ourselves in conversations. We allow silence. We let go of arguments we could win but no longer wish to fight. We stop entering rooms with the burden of being impressive, entertaining, or flawless. We show up as we are, flawed, radiant, human. And in doing so, we begin to touch the kind of peace that cannot be faked. But why do so many of us perform in the first place? Because from an early age we were taught that our worth was conditional. Conditional on obedience, appearance, achievement, or charm. We were told, sometimes directly, sometimes silently, that to be loved, we must impress. So we crafted roles. The achiever, the peacemaker, the caretaker, the rebel, the star. And those roles, while helpful in childhood, become prisons in adulthood. We forget they were masks and begin to believe they are who we are. Choosing peace over performance is the radical act of taking off the mask and trusting that we are enough without it. I once met a man who had spent his life in corporate law working 90-hour weeks. He had 3 houses, 2 luxury cars, and a reputation for brilliance. But his eyes held a restlessness that betrayed his accolades. In a quiet moment, he admitted, "I don't know who I am when I'm not achieving. I'm afraid to stop because I don't know what's underneath." But one day, forced into a sabbatical after burnout and a heart scare, he began to paint. Not for galleries, not for profit, just for the joy of it. And in that quiet practice, he rediscovered a version of himself long buried under ambition. For the first time, he said, "I feel at peace." even if no one's clapping. That's the thing about performance. It relies on applause. But peace doesn't. Peace doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need to be admired or validated. It is enough in itself. And when you begin to prioritize peace, something curious happens. People who once fed off your performance may grow confused or even agitated. The colleague who expected you to carry the team. The friend who only called when they needed your energy. The partner who praised you when you played small. They may push back, not because you've wronged them, but because your new peace unsettles their old expectations. You are no longer playing the part they cast you in. You are becoming real. And reality, for those who live in illusion, can be uncomfortable. But let that discomfort be. Let it pass through them. It is not yours to manage, because what awaits you on the other side of performance is not just peace. It is presence. You begin to inhabit your own life more fully. A morning coffee becomes sacred. A slow walk becomes grounding. A true connection becomes nourishment. You no longer rush through life as if it were a checklist. You begin to live it as an unfolding mystery, not a series of tasks to be mastered. This shift does not happen overnight. At times, the temptation to perform will resurface, especially in moments of vulnerability. You may catch yourself slipping into roles out of habit. But each time you notice it and gently return to peace, you grow stronger. Not the brittle strength of armor, but the supple strength of roots. There is also a kind of magnetism that comes with living in peace. Not the flashy kind that attracts crowds, but the quiet kind that draws in kindred spirits. People who value depth over drama, stillness over noise, truth over image. You begin to realize that the love which remains when you stop performing is the only kind worth keeping. We are not here to be perfect. We are here to be whole. And wholeness includes rest, softness, slowness. It includes saying no without guilt. It includes choosing joy that no one else may understand. It includes leaving behind a performance that once protected you but now suffocates you. When you choose peace over performance, you may lose some applause, but you gain yourself. And in gaining yourself, you begin to understand a secret that changes everything. You were never too much. You were simply in the wrong theater. There is a peculiar kind of freedom that emerges not when the world quiets down, but when you are no longer rattled by its noise. To become indifferent to chaos is not to become numb or apathetic. It is to transcend the gravitational pull of disorder. It is the result of an inner integration that no longer allows external storms to dictate the climate of your inner world. This transformation is not instant. It is the fruit of struggle, awakening, and surrender. It is the quiet strength of a person who has walked through fire and no longer fears its heat. For much of our lives, we are conditioned to respond to chaos with reactivity. When people shout, we shout louder. When the world speeds up, we race to keep up. When circumstances spiral, we grasp for control of others, of ourselves, of anything that promises stability. This is not weakness, it is instinct. But instinct unexamined becomes bondage, and chaos, when met with fear, multiplies. I once knew a woman named Talia who lived as though the world might collapse at any moment. Every crisis, whether in her family, her job, or the news, was a personal emergency. She bore the weight of others' problems as if they were her own. Her nervous system was constantly on high alert, her sense of self tied to her ability to fix, solve, soothe, or prevent. But over time, this chronic vigilance wore her down. Her body became ill, her joy faded, and her relationships frayed. One day, after a particularly painful betrayal, she simply stopped. Not out of despair, but out of exhaustion. And in that stopping, something unexpected happened. She began to see. Without the constant blur of reaction, a strange clarity arose. The chaos was still there, but she was no longer inside it. She had become the observer, not the captive. This is the shift. When you become indifferent to chaos, you cease to be its servant. You begin to understand that not every storm requires your involvement. Not every conflict requires your defense. Not every injustice must be personally avenged. There is power in restraint. There is courage in non-reaction. There is healing in the silence that follows the refusal to participate in madness. But how does one reach such a state? It is not by denying emotion or building walls, quite the opposite. It is by walking through the labyrinth of one's own psyche, meeting the shadows, grieving the illusions, and confronting the ways we have attached our identity to suffering. You realize that chaos often triggers the parts of us that still feel unworthy, unseen, or unsafe. When someone insults us, we feel compelled to defend ourselves because a part of us believes we need to prove our worth. When someone betrays us, we feel shattered because we handed them the key to our stability. When the world seems unjust, we become enraged because we've been taught that pain must be answered with punishment. But when we heal these fractures, the chaos no longer finds a home in us. It passes by like a storm that brushes the windows, but never breaks the glass. There is a profound inner silence that develops in those who have faced their own darkness. Not silence as in emptiness, but as in presence. You learn to sit in a room where people are losing their tempers and remain still. You learn to receive criticism without collapsing. You learn to witness others unravel without rushing to rescue them or change them, not because you don't care, but because you no longer need to fix the world in order to feel whole. Your peace is not dependent on external order. It arises from internal alignment. A man once told me a story of being raised in a household where yelling was the dominant language. Chaos was normal, sudden outbursts, constant blame, unpredictable moods. As an adult, he found himself recreating that pattern, choosing partners who brought drama, workplaces that thrived on urgency, friends who stirred conflict. Until one day, sitting on the porch of a cabin in the woods far from cell service, and noise, he cried for 3 hours, not from sadness but from the unfamiliar sensation of calm. I realized I had confused peace with boredom, he said, but now I understand it was the absence of chaos that scared me because I didn't know who I was without it. And that was his turning point. Slowly, he learned to unhook from the thrill of dysfunction. He learned that quiet was not emptiness but sanctuary. When you become indifferent to chaos, you stop seeing it as a call to arms and start seeing it as a mirror. You begin to ask, what in me is still drawn to this? What lesson is being offered here? Sometimes the lesson is to walk away. Sometimes it is to speak truth without rage. Sometimes it is to do nothing at all. But always, it is an invitation to center yourself in something deeper than reaction. In this space, chaos becomes information, not identity. There is also an unexpected ripple effect. When you hold your center amidst disorder, others feel it. It unsettles those who thrive on drama, yes, but it also awakens something in those who are ready for peace. Your stillness becomes a kind of sanctuary for them too. It reminds them of what's possible. It offers a new way of being, not through preaching but through presence. None of this means you will never be shaken again. We are human. Life surprises us. But the difference is this. When chaos arrives, you don't become it. You recognize it. You allow it. You move through, but you do not hand over your inner compass. You no longer live at the mercy of what is loudest. You choose what is truest. There is a moment in life, sometimes sudden, sometimes gradual, when we simply stop running. Not because we've given up, but because we finally understand the futility of the race. The race to be enough. The race to be seen. The race to earn love, dignity, belonging. We come to see the world not as a stage on which we must constantly perform, but as a mirror that has always been reflecting back to us the truths we were too afraid to accept. That we are not broken, not deficient, not unworthy, but simply human, and that is enough. When you no longer try to prove your worth, you have not become arrogant. You have become free. Free from the invisible chains that bound your spirit to the expectations of others. Free from the exhausting need to be impressive, admired, or validated. Free from the fear that who you are in your quiet moments is not enough. From early on, many of us are taught, through words or silence, that worth is conditional. Conditional on achievement, on beauty, on obedience, on success. We learn to associate our value with what we can offer others, how well we can perform, how much we can sacrifice. This belief becomes a lens through which we view the world and ourselves. We become addicted to approval because we were never taught how to sit with ourselves without it. I once met a young man named Jonah. He had spent his entire life chasing approval, first from his strict father, then from competitive peers, and later from a society that rewarded hustle and image over authenticity. He graduated top of his class, landed a high-paying job, and meticulously curated a life that appeared perfect. But underneath it all was a gnawing emptiness, a quiet panic that if he stopped striving, he would vanish. He couldn't rest. He couldn't breathe deeply. He was haunted by the fear of becoming invisible. One evening, after yet another promotion failed to bring him peace, Jonah sat alone in his apartment and wept. Not because he had failed, but because he had succeeded, and it hadn't healed him. That was his awakening. That night he began a journey, not to become someone else, but to remember who he had been before he believed he was not enough. This is the journey of all who stop trying to prove their worth. It is a return, not to who others want you to be, but to who you truly are when the masks fall away. When you no longer try to prove your worth, your energy returns to you. You no longer pour it into polishing your image or earning favor. Instead, you begin to cultivate depth. You spend time with your soul. You invest in truth rather than performance. There is a strange calm that emerges when you no longer need to be extraordinary. You stop measuring your value in likes, promotions, or admiration. You stop over-explaining yourself, defending your choices, or shrinking your truth to make others comfortable. You speak when it matters. You stay silent when it doesn't. You learn that your presence in its quiet and unadorned form is enough. To those who have lived their lives under the weight of proving, this shift can be terrifying. It feels like death. And in a way, it is the death of the persona, the false self, the identity built on survival. But beyond that, death lies rebirth. You begin to notice beauty again, not as something to acquire or control, but as something to receive. You laugh without needing to be clever. You cry without needing to justify it. You show up as you are, not as who you think you should be. It is important to say that this is not a rejection of excellence or growth. It is a rejection of the belief that your worth hinges on them. You can still create, build, lead, and dream, but you do so from fullness, not emptiness. Your actions become expressions of truth, not desperate calls for recognition. You shift from "look what I can do" to "this is what flows through me when I'm aligned." A woman once told me of her journey from people pleaser to truth teller. She said, "I used to say yes just to be liked. I was terrified of disappointing others. But the more I said yes to them, the more I said no to myself." It wasn't until her body broke down, exhaustion, anxiety, chronic pain, that she realized something had to change. She began saying no. At first, she lost friends. She faced criticism. But over time, the people who remained were the ones who loved her not for what she could give them, but for who she truly was. "I thought proving my worth would bring me love," she said. "But I found love only when I stopped trying to prove." When you stop trying to prove your worth, you become a mirror to others. Some will resent your stillness because it reveals their unrest. Some will envy your self-acceptance because it reflects their self-doubt. But others, those who are also tired of the race, will be drawn to your quiet strength. They will feel safe with you, seen by you, because your presence will give them permission to rest too. This kind of worth cannot be taken. It is not based on appearance, performance, or perfection. It is rooted in being. It is grounded in the sacred fact that you exist, and that is miracle. Enough. In truth, the world does not need more people chasing worth. It needs more people embodying it. People who have made peace with their scars. People who can sit with discomfort without fleeing. People who are not afraid to walk away from applause when it costs them their soul. To stop proving your worth is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of a more honest one. One where your joy is not stolen by comparison. Where your peace is not dependent on performance. Where your love is not a transaction but a gift. Something profound happens when you no longer live in pursuit of validation or trapped in the echo chamber of others' expectations. You begin to return to the core of who you are, not as an identity crafted for survival, but as a presence that emerges when all pretense is stripped away. And it is from this core, this quiet, unapologetic authenticity, that life begins to shape itself around your truth. The shift is almost imperceptible at first, but as you walk more deeply into your own wholeness, you start attracting what reflects that same energy back to you. This alignment is not mystical in the way many imagine. It is rather deeply psychological and spiritual in the most grounded sense. The world around us responds not only to what we say or do, but to the unconscious energy we emit. When we live in distortion, trying to be who we're not, pretending to be smaller or larger than we are, suppressing our desires, or clinging to unworthiness, we attract mirrors of that distortion. But when we begin to live truthfully, the external world reorders itself. Relationships shift. Opportunities change. What once held power over us loses its grip. What once eluded us begins to find us. I once spoke with a woman named Camila, a former lawyer who had built her entire life around meeting others' expectations. She had followed all the rules, climbed every ladder, and curated an image of strength and success. But inside, she was dying. The truth of who she was, a writer, a sensitive soul, someone who needed solitude and depth, was buried beneath years of performance. When her body finally forced her to stop through illness, she made a radical choice. She walked away. From the job, the lifestyle, even some relationships. At first, she was terrified. She had no map, no promise of safety. But slowly, as she leaned into her own rhythms, she began to meet people who resonated with her deeper self. Artists, thinkers, healers, people who mirrored her authenticity, not her mask. It was as if the universe had been waiting, she said. I had to become myself for the right life to find me. This is how alignment works. It does not reward performance, it responds to truth. And yet this truth is not static. It is alive, evolving. To attract what aligns with your truth, you must first know what your truth is. That means facing yourself, often in solitude. It means asking, what do I truly value when no one is watching? What do I love? Not because it's impressive, but because it makes me feel alive. What am I afraid to admit, even to myself? These questions are not answered quickly. They are lived into. They require courage. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that listens deeply. And here is the paradox. To begin attracting what aligns with your truth, you must be willing to lose everything that doesn't. This is why the journey is so difficult. For many, the shedding of the false self is not painless. It may mean the end of relationships built on roles you no longer wish to play. It may mean walking away from a career that pays well, but depletes your soul. It may mean being misunderstood, or even judged. But in that loss there is space. And in that space, your life can finally begin to reflect your inner reality. People often ask, how do I find the right relationship, the right job, the right path? The answer lies not in chasing, but in becoming. When you are deeply connected to your own essence, you do not need to force outcomes. You do not need to convince anyone to see your worth. You simply live it. You speak from it. You act in accordance with it. And in doing so, you naturally gravitate toward what is meant for you. You no longer negotiate your values to fit in. You no longer beg for crumbs from tables that were never meant to nourish you. You recognize that authenticity is not arrogance. It is alignment. There was a man I once met, quiet, thoughtful, a gifted musician. For years he played in bands he didn't resonate with, performing songs that meant nothing to him, because that was what paid the bills. But his spirit dimmed. He began writing his own music that came from wounds and longings and wonder. At first no one listened, but he kept going, not for fame, but for freedom. And eventually people found him, not millions, but enough. Enough to live, to be seen, to be affirmed not for who he pretended to be, but for who he was. He told me, I was invisible when I was hiding. I became visible when I came home to myself. What is often missed in the conversation about attraction and alignment is this. The things we are calling into our lives are often waiting just outside the doors we are too afraid to walk through. We say we want love, but we cling to people who cannot meet us. We say we want peace, but we keep environments that thrive on chaos. We say we want purpose, but we silence the voice inside that points us somewhere unfamiliar. We must understand that becoming aligned with our truth is not a passive experience. It is active surrender. It is choosing over and over again to listen, inward even when the outer world tries to drown it out. Eventually, you realize that life is not about finding something out there. It is about clearing away the internal noise so you can hear the call of your own soul and then responding to it. That response is the beginning of resonance. And from that resonance, everything begins to unfold. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but in harmony with who you truly are. Peace is not found in perfection. It does not arrive when the puzzle of your life is finally assembled, every wound healed, every mistake erased, every relationship repaired, and every piece put in its rightful place. That is the great illusion, the quiet lie that seduces so many into a lifetime of striving, fixing, controlling, and chasing after the mirage of completeness. The truth is far more paradoxical, far more liberating. Peace comes not when the world outside is orderly, but when the storm within is no longer resisted. It comes not when all is fixed, but when you stop believing it needed fixing in the first place. This doesn't mean we surrender to chaos or remain passive in the face of injustice or dysfunction. It means we stop making our inner peace conditional upon circumstances that are often beyond our control. It means we stop waiting for our wounds to disappear before we let ourselves rest. It means we stop demanding that others change before we feel worthy or safe. Real peace is not the product of control. It is the fruit of surrender. Imagine a man trying to control every current of the ocean from the shore. He believes that if he can just still the waves, he will finally be able to enjoy the water. But the ocean was never meant to be tamed. The ocean invites you to float, not by commanding it to be calm, but by yielding to its rhythm. In the same way, our lives are full of tides, grief and joy, love and betrayal, clarity and confusion. We do not find peace by neutralizing these tides, but by learning how to remain steady in their midst. There's a story of a woman named Eliza, who, after a bitter divorce and years of anxiety, decided to isolate herself from all connection, believing that healing meant being entirely whole before returning to the world. She kept working on herself, reading every self-help book, attending countless workshops, journaling through every emotion. And while these tools had value, they became another form of control. She believed that if she just worked hard enough, she would fix all that was broken in her. But the more she tried to fix, the more broken she felt. It wasn't until one night, in the middle of her apartment floor, exhausted and alone, that she simply stopped. She wept without trying to make meaning of it. She breathed without trying to regulate it. And in that stillness, without any answers or conclusions, she felt something she hadn't in years: peace. Not because she had resolved anything, but because she had finally let go of the belief that it needed resolution to begin with. The belief that life must be neat and tidy is one rooted in the fear of chaos. And yet life itself is born from chaos. Creation always is. Think of the stars, formed from collapsing gas and dust. Think of the birth of a child, screaming, blood, rupture, and then life. Even personal transformation does not come gently. It comes with darkness, dismantling death of the former self. And still we try to package our lives into clean lines and polite stories. We try to edit our grief, our past, our pain. But healing is not aesthetic. It is raw, alive, and deeply unmanageable. The more we try to polish it, the more distant peace becomes. Peace begins to enter not when we achieve control, but when we relinquish the demand for life to look a certain way. You see, much of our suffering is not caused by pain itself, but by the judgment we place on that pain. We say, "This should not be happening." Or, "If I were better, this would be over." Or, "If they loved me, they wouldn't have done this." These thoughts wrap the wound in shame and confusion. But what if we removed the judgment and let the experience be what it is? Not because it is pleasant, but because it is real. Then, we are no longer in resistance. Then peace becomes possible. Think of the seasons. Winter does not apologize for being cold. Autumn does not mourn the falling of its leaves. They are as they are. But imagine if the tree resisted, if it fought the shedding of its leaves, thinking, "Something is wrong with me." We would say, "No, dear tree, this is your nature. Let it fall. Spring will come." And so it is with us. When we allow the winters of our soul, the losses, the failures, the endings, to exist without demanding they hurry along or justify themselves, we begin to embody the deeper rhythm of life. Peace, then, is less a destination and more a relationship with reality, with ourselves, with what is. It is not passive or resigned, but deeply wise. It says, "This moment, as it is enough." Not because it is easy, but because it is honest. And when we stop running from honesty, when we stop trying to micromanage our emotional lives, we return to something ancient and eternal within us, the part of us that has never been broken, only buried. I once met a man who had lost his job, his partner, and his sense of identity all in the same year. He confessed to me that he kept trying to find something to fix his resume, to fix his reputation, to fix the story people were telling about him. But one day, while walking alone through a forest, he realized something strange. The trees didn't care. The wind didn't ask for his credentials. The sky made no demands. For the first time, he felt that he could simply exist without performing, without fixing, without proving anything. "I realized I could be at peace even while everything looked like a mess," he said. "And that was the first time I actually felt free." That is the doorway. When peace is no longer the reward for solving the equation, but the presence that emerges when you stop trying to solve it. It does not mean we stop growing, loving, or mending what can be mended, but it means we stop making our worth, our joy, our serenity contingent upon perfection. It means we stop trying to earn rest. We stop postponing ease. Sometimes the greatest act of healing is not to do more, but to stop. To lay down the armor, to sit with the ache, to accept the mystery. To say, "Even this is part of my becoming." And in that moment, when the mind surrenders and the heart opens, you may find that peace was never a distant shore to swim toward. It was the quiet current beneath you all along, waiting for you to stop thrashing and simply float.